ፕሬዘንቴሽን እንሄዳለን። የሚቀጥለውን የሚያቀርቡልን ዶክተር ኤዶም አብርሃም ናቸው። ፕሮፌሰር አብርሃም ኤዶ በኒዘርላንድ ዩኒቨርሲቲ ውስጥ አሲስታንት ፕሮፌሰር ናቸው። quantifying the regional cooperation to regional planning, national planning የሚለውን ጽሁፍ ያቀርቡልናል። በሚቀጥለው ወደ ዶክተር ኤዶም እንሄዳለን። ፕሊዝ።
አመሰግናለሁ ጌታቸው። ስክሪን ይታያል?
ይታያል። ኤዶም ቀጥል።
አመሰግናለሁ። በእንግሊዘኛ ነው የማወራው ስለምቸገር በአማርኛ ኤክስፕሌን ለማድረግ አመሰግናለሁ ስለተጋበዝኩኝ። What I'm going to talk about is the same title, which is Operational Planning of Water, Energy and Food Infrastructure, and quantifying the value of cooperation. And I'll try to give an idea of what that cooperation looks like, and give some insights into what could be done in future, and perhaps reflect a little bit on the GERD and its potential impact on cooperation. So I'll first talk about kind of important concepts in this research approach, and then show some results, and then I'll conclude with some reflections. I don't have a specific suggestion on how things should be done in cooperation, but at least I will try to leave you with some questions. An important concept when one talks about cooperation is in mathematics is what are called cooperative games. And I'll give you an example. Here we've got two singers. One singer on a single night can get 1,000 birr, and then and here our sister could get 500 birr, for example, if they worked individually. And then if they made a band together, they could get 3,000 birr. So of course, a natural question is, if they were to form a band, how do you, what's the desirable or fair allocation of this extra 1,500 birr that they get, this payoff or marginal gain in payoff that's derived from this cooperation. And of course, this depends on what they get individually. Of course, both of them will not accept less than 1,000 birr, yeah? Sorry, our friend, he would not accept less than 1,000 birr, and she wouldn't accept less than 500. But he says that he should get 1,000 more, because that is kind of proportionally what his value is compared to what she gets individually. And then she says, let's divide this extra gain equally, because they get it just because they formed a duo. So it doesn't matter what she was able to get by herself. So there's always this question of fairness, and there are multiple notions of how you would divide this marginal gain that you get from cooperation, of course. And then you could think about what's a stable duo, kind of what is a good redistribution of this payoff so that they stay friends. Yeah, questions like that. Of course, what can she do to improve her lot? What she could do is she could actually improve her performance, so that she individually can get a lot more, so that she has some bargaining power. So this is something to think about when we're talking about cooperation in a transboundary basin as well. There are also other interesting concepts. I see Getachew here. Of course, this is a paper by him. So there are questions about water rights. Yeah. So what is a fair, equitable allocation of the water rights, so that if you don't use it, of course, you could sell it as well. Yeah. So that's one concept. Another concept is how do you use this existing resource efficiently? So how can you get the best economic value out of it? So we use what's called the water energy food nexus to kind of optimize resource use among multiple sectors, energy production, agricultural sector, and other sectors. So this kind of framework also allows you to kind of tease out trade-offs and synergies across sectors, and especially within a country or within a transboundary basin. So there have been talks in this conference as well on this, and I think you're familiar with the concept already. And then the other question is, what are the mechanisms for cooperation that add this economic value? Of course, you could cooperate or collaborate in multiple ways. So, so you have these three different things, basically, you can think about. So, and I go back to this paper by Getachew and his collaborator. So what they looked at was, I mentioned water sharing agreements, and then water trade institutions as a way of kind of paying payments between the countries, and then also thinking about kind of additional externalities, for example, like sedimentation that impact downstream countries, hydropower generation potential, and so on. And they look at assessing as a social planner, kind of redistributing water allocation over the whole basin and trying to use it most efficiently. And they decided, actually, the results showed that actually this marginal gain does exist, but it's very small. It's about $500 million per year, something like that, under these arrangements. And so the conclusion was that, well, this is really small, and perhaps kind of we should look at broader ways of kind of introducing positive externalities to kind of increase this core where everybody would gain, or you get, like we saw with the singers, you have this extra payoff that is much larger. So in my work, that's exactly what I try to do. So we look at free trade in agricultural products and energy within a regional context to kind of broaden this payoff to be much bigger, so that cooperation could be increased or facilitated. And so an important aspect is that when you do this also is to show where the benefits come from, where the costs are, and if there are intersectoral trade-offs, you can also show them in managing the whole resource, not just water, energy, but land as well. What does this look like? Perhaps I won't go into the techniques, but yeah, so it requires actually modeling the whole basin, so making a kind of a digital twin of it, looking at the energy infrastructure that exists, also planned infrastructure, looking at cropping patterns, potentials for growing different crops within the basin everywhere in a spatially gridded way. And we can look at all kinds of processes, production and consumption and trade in the food and energy sectors, losses in the systems, introducing also policy objectives like, let's say, food security or the ability to produce food locally and things like that. And such problems could be actually mathematically solved to come up with solutions. And that's what we do in our research. So, and I talked about cooperation and what does it look like. We consider multiple kinds of cooperation, starting from unilateral scenarios like you would think happens now. So looking at nationally trying to maximize economic benefits in your planning. And also looking at only international trade and long-term electricity markets. And then and another layer of cooperation could be just sharing flow information, river flow information between the upstream and downstream countries. You could go further and you could have a free trade scenario where you share everything, expected yields within countries and so on, but you actually plan for maximizing the national benefits. And the other extreme is to kind of think of one as a kind of a central planner and to reallocate the water throughout the region as a kind of a social planner. And in which case you are trying to maximize the regional economic benefits, which you would redistribute later. To kind of look at what is possible, what we did was, of course, we can't test the future, but we look at the past. So going back to 1990 to 2009, and collecting a lot of data on trade, on discharge, on precipitation, on all sorts of things. And we simulate these cooperation scenarios. From the unilateral, where just water flows, to where information flows between countries on discharge, to scenarios where you have product trades between the countries, all the way to regional planning in one go. And we do this like planning 3 years ahead, and we simulate the historic scenario. And what happens is that, what we find is that, of course, this is clear from a cooperative game perspective. As you go from unilateral to cooperation, the kind of the economic benefits for each country increase. You see at the top for Egypt, and at the bottom for the regional case, the kind of the total regional benefits. So what you see is that in the cooperative scenario, everyone gains, and Ethiopia gains let's say the smallest amount. This does not include the water rights trading, for example. This is purely kind of what you gain from producing agricultural goods, energy, and trading. And what we also find is that for Sudan, for example, the most gains happen when information is shared on discharge, and that allows Sudan to plan its agricultural activities better. We look at also what the impact of climate uncertainty, but still we show that the gains are still important. And in this setting, you could also look at water productivity. For example, we see that Egypt has the highest water productivity. That is kind of dollars gained per meter cubed of water. And Sudan has a much lower one at 0.19 cents per meter cubed. But Ethiopia is, of course, comparable to Egypt. And that's to do with the kind of the good climate conditions in Ethiopia. And what we show is that also in this cooperation scenarios, the agricultural water productivity increases everywhere. So as you go from the flow information to full cooperation, it is actually consistent. One could also look at the cropping patterns in the different countries. And of course, in our model is also livestock implicitly that requires the growing of fodder. And you see that there is a small increase in production in Egypt. So the kind of the agriculture in the full coordination case, productivity goes downstream. And more forage is grown in Sudan, which is sold or exported to the Arab countries and so on. In Ethiopia, also, there's kind of a shift away from cereals towards the more profitable crops like vegetables and nuts and so on. So these are things you could actually tease out and, of course, assess what do these mean in practice, etc. One could also look at self-sufficiency. Yeah, if you decide to grow a lot of crops locally, for example, Ethiopia could do up to 80%. But that actually has a decline in kind of agricultural production value. That's to do with the efficiency of agricultural practices in the countries. And we see kind of this trade-off between self-sufficiency and economic trade-off and economic value is biggest in Ethiopia, for example. One could also look at the trade-offs between agriculture and hydropower and how you allocate that resource. I'll skip over this because it's less important. But maybe to say is that if you are regionally coordinating, you have a kind of a broader space for kind of doing this trade-off and redistributing the gains. So now, an obvious question that comes is, okay, this is the past and we can compare it with real data and it shows with real product prices globally and regionally and so on. And it shows some potential for cooperation and its payoff. And then what we did was also to look at the GERD. And what if you had the GERD and we look at 2025 to 2045 to say, okay, what would the improvements be? And of course, what we find is that it improves the economic benefits for Ethiopia significantly. So from, let's say, $250 million per year to over $5 billion per year under cooperative scenarios. And we also find that this is the case when you have not just energy production at the GERD, but expansion of irrigation in Ethiopia. So if you don't have that, that's about $0.9 billion per year. But if you also expand irrigation, that goes up to $5.6 billion per year in extra economic benefits. For Egypt, if you don't have any cooperation, of course, it means less flow downstream. So their economic benefits decrease by about $2.2 billion per year. But if you actually have a cooperative scenario where Ethiopia gains this much, then their loss is quite small, about $250 million per year. But this actually does not include water rights. So it's actually not a loss when you consider that. And Ethiopia's gains could be also much higher than what is stated here. What we find is also something known to a lot of people already. Sudan benefits from GERD under all scenarios, be it Ethiopia having irrigation expansion or not. Sudan benefits a lot. And then finally, what we show is that all these are possible only with about a 10% reductions in annual flow at Dongola, which is an DM under coordination scenario. So this is actually a small decrease in flow that is given Ethiopia, for example, if it had a fair water rights allocated to it, then it would still be able to sell water rights and gain all the economic benefits. So this is an important concept to really think about. And then we can look at, again, like I showed earlier, okay, what happens with electricity trades in these scenarios? So if you have coordination, Ethiopia, of course, that implies a regional power pool that is expanded in future, and Ethiopia is selling a lot of power to Sudan, and there's also power flow to Egypt, and Egypt would be able to sell some power to Arab countries. Ethiopia also sells some power to Kenya, and so on. And if you have the unilateral case where there is actually no expansion in power trades, of course, that is much smaller. So are the gains for Ethiopia. You could look at, of course, the same things I showed earlier. Now Ethiopia's irrigated agriculture has increased by about 800,000 hectares. But there also you can see what are the most favorable things to grow, and if you have a regional trade. Which crops should each country grow, and so on. This here I'm showing the flows at Dongola and Eldim, and you can see that in the unilateral case, let's say under GERD and irrigation expansion in Ethiopia and Sudan, the decrease is actually quite small. It's about 10% earlier I showed. These are important to show because there's kind of a fear that big changes are going to happen, but with small change in flow, the whole region could gain economically significantly, and cooperation means that also this cushioning of the reduction at Dongola and also kind of the costs and benefits could be redistributed, and what it means also as let's say upstream countries urbanize more and so on. And agricultural activities become more water efficient. This could be even this impact could be even smaller.
Edo, you have.
Yeah, I'm going to finish. Yes. So I started with this idea that one should plan infrastructure in a kind of a really integrated manner, looking at all sectors. And why is that? Because what I showed is that synergetic resource use across space, especially among the countries, within country and so on, is vital to increase economic benefits. That's one aspect. So for roughly 1% shift in agricultural water use, you have about a 10% increase in economic gains. Yeah, this is important. Another thing is that the agricultural water use efficiency can be achieved through cropping specialization region. Yeah. So if you have a free trade zone where there are no frictions, you have cold chains, you have more connected, transport infrastructure and so on, then you could do much better in your water use. The other thing is that new reservoir projects should be assessed and could be assessed under cooperation too. So that's one. And an important one that is kind of often left in discussions as if, we have to be apologetic about it, is that irrigation expansion in Ethiopia is key, not just for Ethiopia, but regionally. In fact, if you go to 2050, 2100 global models project that there would be a net export of agricultural products from the Nile Basin using surface and groundwater. So that is it. So Ethiopia should have a share of this. Now remember the singer I showed you at the beginning, which to get her fair share, then she should go from 500 birr to 1,000 as an individual. Then she could argue that she should get more. And this is a kind of the stance that Ethiopia should take. And I think the GERD did this to an extent, but irrigation expansion could also fasten this. The other thing is, of course, information sharing for downstream countries plays a big role in improving their productivity, and information technology could be used to bring downstream benefits. So I will stop at this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edo. Really appreciate, and we may have some questions and clarification later. Okay, I believe that the next speaker would be Ato Zrihun. Am I right? From Ethiopia.